You are listening to The Last Fireflies, a radical climate podcast bringing you discussions of climate science and activism from all around Europe.
So, hi everyone. Today we're on with another Infospill on accelerated warming. It's me, Em, and Robbie is going to tell us a lot of stuff.
Yeah, hi folks. We are back with the apparently doomer part of the show. But it's not doomer, it's just the science seems to be the doomer.
Yeah, it's not the end of the world, it's just science.
It's possibly the end of the world, but
Also science.
also science, yeah. Right. So for the next 3 or 4 episodes that contain Infospill segments, we are going to talk about this issue of accelerated global warming. It's a relatively new phenomenon that has been described in the literature. And yeah, we are going to focus on what it is and what are some possible explanations for it and what are the consequences and how it does or should affect policy, but also like the discourse, hopefully in the climate movement. I guess I'm going to start with a parenthesis relating to James Hansen. Maybe you're familiar with his name. He's one of the top climate scientists active at the moment. And we will refer a lot to James Hansen's work because this research about accelerated global warming is not part of the established climate science field yet. And as we said, the IPCC is always lagging behind the cutting edge in knowledge in the field, right? And so James Hansen and the team of well-renowned researchers that published together with him, they've been focusing on this topic in the last few years. Maybe a few words about Hansen. I think he's quite an important figure in the climate movement. And just to give some details about him, for those of you who don't know who he is, he's a leading climate scientist. In the 70s, he worked a lot on modeling Earth's climate, and his work, especially on modeling aerosols, was historically one of the major factors that helped the formation of the scientific consensus on climate change. This is the late 70s, early 80s. And then he was the director at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. It's one of the important organizations at NASA. So he was quite in an important position and a well-renowned researcher at this point in the 80s. And then in 88, he gave a testimony in front of the US Congress in one of the commissions on energy and whatnot. And his testimony was about climate change, but in particular about the fact that it's man-made and that it will hold dangerous consequences in the future if greenhouse gas emissions are not curbed. And this was quite an important historic moment because it was the first time that some major scientist or figure from the research field gave like this kind of testimony in the political sphere. Before 88, climate change was mostly discussed in between scientists and maybe between activists, but in the political sphere, it was not really something seriously considered. So this was 88, and after that, throughout the 90s, and 2000s, he realized that actually politicians are not going to seriously listen to what he's saying. So he started trying to talk publicly, first between scientists and then in the public, about his results and about the danger of climate change. And he was systematically sabotaged. Like his talks were being cancelled. Then during the Bush era, he was censored at NASA. People were like the top-down censorship of what government employees could say publicly and stuff like that. And so finally, at some point, he left NASA and he started doing advocacy and more recently, even civil disobedience actions. So he participated in protests and this kind of occupying a street and stuff. And he was actually jailed. So he's one of the leading scientists and he's in his 80s now and he has risked jail time for what he says is the future of his grandchildren, right? And he's an important figure for me also, like he inspires me as a scientist, but I think we should also recognize his very important contribution, both to the science and to the creating awareness about the danger of climate change. So this whole discussion about accelerated warming started basically with the now infamous paper called Global Warming in the Pipeline, published in 2023 by Hansen and some other scientists.
Can you tell us why is it termed global warming? Because at some point, people in the climate movement started saying, well, we shouldn't call it that.
I mean, it's just a term. Sometimes in English we use global heating or climate chaos. It's just to deflect some of the criticism coming from the denialist sphere that says that it's not warming everywhere. So like we have snow this year, like Trump said, we have snow this year. Where's global warming? Stuff like that. So climate change will not produce warming everywhere at the same time. In particular, like, for example, if the ocean currents in the Atlantic will collapse due to climate change, then that would mean much cooler winters and even summers in Northern Europe. So it will be a significant global cooling in Northern Europe. And so it's just to put less accent on warming as our knowledge expanded of what the consequences will be, basically. But global heating is accurate because even the cooling where it will happen, it's due to Earth absorbing more heat. So in English, we use global heating sometimes, but in Romanian, for example, we don't have this distinction between warming and heating, so we just use climate change. Oh wait, so you're actually asking why Hansen and co. chose to use the term global warming. I think now I get it. So I think they use it because this phenomenon of acceleration has to do with the global temperature starting to increase faster and faster. So it's not some general observation about the process of change happening faster, but in particular, the temperature, the global mean temperature, is starting to increase faster than it used to during the last decades. So I think that's why they used the older term global warming.
Okay. So you were saying about the 2023 paper?
Yeah, there was a series of papers in 2023. It was this paper, Global Warming in the Pipeline. Then the other important paper is from this year, 2025. It's called Global Warming Has Accelerated. Are the United Nations well informed? So the provisional title that I also put for this episode is a reference to this paper. It's long, but it tries to explain everything in terms that even non-scientists could understand. Yeah, it's still not very simple. I've had a hard time to read it. It's long and still complicated, but yeah, hopefully it's accessible even for non-scientists. It's an important paper. And basically, what we are going to talk about, all of the topics are covered in this 2025 paper. Okay, so what is accelerated warming? Attention to this topic started in 2023 when we observed like a huge, maybe unprecedented jump in temperatures of 0.4 Celsius. It's really, really huge. It's something that the climate usually experiences maybe during massive volcanic eruptions or something, but we had nothing so drastic happen that year. There was a bit of an El Nino, which contributed to it, but at least half of that warming seems to be unexplained, or apparently unexplained. And the warming continued until 2024 and 25, so it doesn't seem to be recovering from this giant peak in 2023. So questions started to being raised whether this is some kind of transient statistical outlier phenomenon, or whether the climate is experiencing some kind of change in something fundamental in it, whether it's fundamental dynamics or a change due to the fact that we don't understand everything well yet. But yeah, it seems to be something fundamental that is changing in the last maybe 10 years in how climate change is manifesting, in particular to the fact that the average global temperature keeps rising faster and faster. So to put that into perspective, between 1970 and 2010, you have a time series of global average temperature, right? It still goes up and down a little bit, but the trend of it has been almost constant from the 70s until 2010, about 0.18 Celsius per decade, almost linear. And after 2010, there is a sharp uptick in this trend. It seems that it is at least 0.3 Celsius, but maybe more per decade now.
Okay, so it's warming faster than before.
Faster, yeah. Before it was 0.18 Celsius per decade. Now it's 0.3, maybe 0.4 Celsius per decade. Maybe it doesn't sound like it's a huge jump in terms of numbers, right? But it's absolutely huge for the average global temperature of the Earth, right?
But I think at this point, people are really starting to feel it in the day by day. We feel it in the weather. I have this weather app, and in many days, it shows me what the temperature should have been like, before the Industrial Revolution. And on many days, it's 10 degrees over or under.
Yeah, but it's not so obvious whether that's from recent accelerated warming or just the compounding effect of global warming. Just from the fact that things have changed so much, it's not clear that there has been a change in the trend of warming, right? It might have been just so much warming throughout the last decades that we have reached a place far from where temperatures were 40 years ago. So this is relatively new, especially manifesting in the last 5 years. And I would say that I don't think that we can feel it, at least to this significant level, on the day-to-day as of yet.
But that's concerning because I do feel like we feel it because everybody's complaining the summers are so much hotter.
But again, that just could be because of continued warming, right? It's not necessarily something about the change in the trend of warming. So because this phenomenon has been occurring only in the last few years, there's a question whether it's something temporary or whether it will continue like this for the following decades, right? Because normally you would need to have a lot of data points to say what the trend is and what the future temperatures will be. But of course, this issue is relevant for policy and for activism. So we cannot wait until enough years pass, right? Because by then it might be too late to do anything about it. So yeah, we need to hold this uncertainty about this phenomenon and integrate it into our political work. Yeah, so as I said, especially this jump in 2023 has been huge. And reactions to this have ranged from saying that there was a huge El Nino and El Nino is responsible for it, but it's not. And the other extreme is saying that 2023 is something unexplained by current physics, which is one paper in Nature is saying, which might be the case. It might be the case that this is something new. The papers published by Hansen and his collaborators are saying that it's actually not something new in the physics, like it's not a new phenomenon, but rather we have so far underestimated the relative effects of, in particular, warming due to CO2 and the effects of aerosols, which lead to cooling. And because both of those effects are actually stronger than modeled in the established climate science, what we are seeing now is just an expected consequence of aerosol emissions reductions, right? This is just like a very basic summary. So Hansen is saying that there's not something fundamentally new happening, it's just a normal consequence of the established science. It's just that we have underestimated the warming effect of CO2 and the cooling effect of aerosols.
How does that explain 2023? Can you just, again, shortly try to summarize that?
Well, we will dedicate the whole next episode to actually entangling exactly this. But in essence, what Hansen is saying is that the aerosol effect has been underestimated. And due to reductions in the emissions of aerosols that occurred between 2010 and 2020, in particular due to air quality regulations in China, and more importantly, regulations impacting ship emissions, the emissions of cargo ships, ships that transport fossil fuels and other cargo around the world. The argument is that these two regulations together lead to a pretty strong decrease in aerosols, and in turn that unchains basically the full global warming potential of CO2. Global warming has been kept in check for the last decades from these aerosols, which have been underestimated. And now climate change is fully unchained, and we see the full warming effect of CO2 and other greenhouse gases now. That's basically in a nutshell.
Okay, that makes sense.
Well, we will explore it more in the following sections. I've tried just to say it in a very simple summary right here. So there's still some debate about whether this accelerated warming is a real phenomenon or it's a kind of a temporary effect which is due maybe to some kind of clouds reorganizing themselves or stuff like that, right? But it does not seem to be the case. And more papers are being published confirming this accelerated warming. Here, I would maybe say a point about confirmation bias, in the sense that I am relying heavily on these publications by Hansen and collaborators. But again, as we've said in other episodes, when you're a scientist who's trying to understand what the likely outcome is going to be, then you need to look at averages and you need to wait for consensus to form, right? But we as activists, we want to prevent any kind of risk for a catastrophic outcome due to climate change, right? And then we need to take seriously this possibility that this accelerated warming is real, because that really changes everything. It compresses the timescales. It also contributes to the faster triggering of tipping points. This whole issue of accelerated warming is, as far as we understand, not related to tipping points. It's something completely different. But faster warming might lead to faster activation of tipping points, right? And so it just accelerates the urgency for action. The time for action is shorter and shorter. And yeah, it seems kind of, again, leading to a direction of doomerism. But I think we should just know about it and use it as a tool in our political work. Just to say to politicians that you need to treat climate change as real urgency, especially in this context of accelerated warming and tipping points, both of which are not really foreseen in national strategies to mitigate climate change. They are not foreseen in the EU's Green Deal plan. So they really need to start treating climate change as a crisis, not just some issues that you can tick, some measures that you can tick in your government plan or whatever, right? It's like, if the climate is someone who had an accident and you are putting just a bandage on the wound, but in fact, the leg is broken. And if you continue treating it just with a bandage, it might get gangrene and you have to amputate it, or you will get sepsis and the whole organism will die, right? So that is what we need to say to politicians, that you need to start treating the climate issue as a crisis right now. Because if you don't, tomorrow it might not matter, or in the next election cycle it might not matter.
Oh, it will matter, but it will be later.
Yeah. It will matter for mitigation, but it might not matter for avoiding some particular outcomes. Of course, as the statistic that I have said already in another episode, which came from Bill McKibben, and I don't know what's the original source, but he said something like every 0.1 degree Celsius increase above, I think, 2 degrees means that the land inhabited by 100 million people changes from just very hot to dangerous to human health. So, of course, we will continue to do mitigation, but considering these tipping point behaviors and these compressed timelines due to accelerated climate change, it might be too late to do prevention measures if we wait. And we know that prevention is always cheaper in the first place than mitigation once a crisis has started to unfold. But it also, prevention leads to less loss of lives and livelihoods. And we will talk in more detail in the following episodes exactly about the nature of this accelerated warming and what are its causes. And now, just to end, let's summarize what we've been talking about. So it seems that in the last 10-15 years, the speed of climate change has been accelerating. The trend of increasing global temperatures has increased from 0.18 degrees warming per decade to around 0.3, maybe 0.4 degrees warming per decade. It's perhaps a new phase into which climate change is entering. And I have referenced James Hansen's work and collaborators who have described this phenomenon. And the explanation that they give for why it's happening has to do with aerosols, the reduction in global aerosol emissions since 2010 to 2020. Aerosols which have generally a cooling trend. And so in the last decades, they have kind of kept in check the warming that is due to CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions. And so now that the aerosols have decreased, the full global warming potential of CO2 has been unleashed. And we are truly entering a new phase of climate change. So that is it in a nutshell. And in the next episodes, we'll describe in more detail what aerosols are and what is their impact on climate. And then we will talk about this potentially unchained new phase of warming and how the warming effect of CO2 has been underestimated. And in particular, we will talk about the so-called climate sensitivity, which characterizes how much warming is due to a given amount of CO2, and which Hansen is claiming that the IPCC has been seriously underestimating. And after that, we will talk about what are all the consequences of all this. So buckle up, we have a lot of grim stuff to talk about more.
Wonderful. Another grim series of predictions will follow.
Yeah, I hope you will be able to sleep after listening to our podcast. It wasn't meant as a horror story podcast, but that is just what life under late capitalism is like. This is a fully listener-supported podcast, and with the price of one coffee or a beer each month, you can help us continue this work by subscribing to our Patreon.
Hearing about Earth's accelerated warming, well, it isn't easy. That would mean a jump in the speed of global warming. Not just what we've already known and calculated, but the heightened warming due to the fact that aerosols have not been factored in before. James Hansen, the scientist who has been talking about this, has also been protesting in the streets, as many of us are. But talking about these things, well, taking them in is a lot. And because it's still winter, I feel like we need to tune into the Earth's energies and slow down as a response. I know the day is getting longer, but it's not long enough. It's dark and cold for a reason, and we're not supposed to huddle about in artificial lighting working all the time. What I'm thinking of here is sleep. Sleep is what happens when our bodies are tired, but also relaxed, also ideally safe. Globally, humans are kind of sleep deprived. Insufficient sleep is considered to be a public health epidemic that is unrecognized. That's not going well at all, neither for us nor for the Earth. I want you to take a caring look at your sleep patterns. What sleep do you need to recharge, to be a person in this world? How much? Where? In what conditions? As teenagers, many of us used to dislike sleeping. I know I did. I saw it as a waste of time. But growing up, sleep becomes the state I wish to surrender myself to. Sleep nourishes. Sleep lulls. And it's not just the politicized self-care I'm talking about. Rest is political. See Tricia Hersey's work at the NAP Ministry. They name sleep deprivation as a racial and social justice issue. Hersey believes that proper rest disrupts white supremacy and capitalism, as well as contemporary grind culture. Sleep is also a way for us to attune to the rhythms of the rest of nature. In winter, some animals hibernate. Trees enter a state called dormancy. We are part of this world, so if we can let ourselves be lulled by the darkness of winter into longer sleeps, we should. Presently, we're supposed to sleep in one go, 7 to maybe 9 hours depending on our body's needs. But in the pre-industrial age, a type of sleep termed biphasic was noticed, meaning people would have a first sleep, wake up in the middle of the night, do some writing, eating, murder someone, and then go back to bed for a second sleep. During this waking time called the watch, which could happen around 1 a.m. or 2 a.m., depending on when they went to sleep, people would be involved in various tasks, such as standing to the fire, or praying to their gods, or, most importantly, socializing. And, you guessed it, having sex. Turns out, modern society and artificial illumination affects human sexual activities as well, not just the fireflies. Historian Roger Ackridge, who has studied the historical records of biphasic sleep, would want you to know that it's not necessarily a bad thing if you wake up in the middle of the night. People have been doing it for centuries. For him, the 21st century is a golden age for sleeping because many of us are luckily not freezing to death, battling lice, or worried about being murdered. Which gets us back to why sleep is political. Being able to safely rest is not afforded to a lot of people, whether they are unhoused, in dangerous combat zones, overcome with stress and nightmares, or else. I do wish we could have a world in which more of us could let our bodies relax into the night. It's a feedback loop, I think. What kind of sleep would propel us towards a future Earth that's climate stable and not socially terrifying? And what kind of societies would we need to live in to get a good night's sleep? Share your thoughts with us.
That's all for today. If you would like to support us, you can do that by interacting with and sharing our episodes on social media and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Or for those of you who would like to help us financially also, you can do that by subscribing to our Patreon or with a one-time donation through Ko-fi. As you know, there has been a quite severe legal crackdown on climate groups all around Europe in recent years, coupled with the rise of the far right in many countries,